Andrea Lipinski.
And I'm Keith DeCandido. Welcome to another wonderful episode of The Chronic Rifter, as we like to call it, the next best thing to Mom's home cooking.
This week we're taking a look at one of the women mentioned during our past discussion on women and fantasy and science fiction, Ursula K. Le Guin.
First, we'd like to thank this week's comic in review is Megaton Man by Don Simpson, published by Kitchen Sink Press. This is a accumulation of the first 4 issues of Simpson's famous parody. It originally came out in 1984, which was about the same time as Valentino came out with his series called Normal Man, which does much the same thing. They both lampoon mainstream comics. There are two things to discuss the worlds of Ursula Le Guin are, on my left, Jim Frankel, an editor, packager, and consultant who last was on our show discussing women in fantasy and science fiction a ways back. On the other side of Andrea, we have Don Keller, who's been both critic and editor in the field for about 20 years, mostly in the fantasy genre. And all the way on the right is P.M. Griffin, author of the Star Commando series and co-author with Andre Norton of the recent book Storms of Victory.
Ursula Le Guin really has a unique position in science fiction. Before Ursula Le Guin, there hadn't been anyone who combined her writing ability, her storytelling power, her authoritative position as an anthropologist, and her feminist vision. She really became the embodiment of a coalescence of a movement. Before Ursula K. Le Guin, women who wanted to write science fiction thought they either had to change their name, write with initials like C.L. Moore, or a male pseudonym like Andre Norton did for years. Everyone knows that Andre Norton's a woman now, but at first people thought this must be some French guy. Or she wrote as Andrew North sometimes. But with Ursula K. Le Guin, all of a sudden, young women, girls who were reading science fiction, who perhaps had been borrowing their older brothers' magazines or, reading it without their parents, knowing they were reading science fiction, that horrible stuff, were able to think of themselves as writing science fiction. And she became a role model for writers like Joan Vinge, Vonda McIntyre, C.J. Cherry, and a whole host of younger writers, P.M. Griffin included. And so she really was a watershed writer. She changed everything.
I think Le Guin's books opened up other fields for me. As you mentioned, the anthropological more than anything. We were discussing this topic a little earlier, and I mentioned that the second book of Earthsea, the Tombs of Atuan, I was so fascinated by Tenar's training, the life she led, the way it was handled, not as, ooh, look at this strange society, but actually taking us into it, that I was disappointed when Get arrived to do the rescue and to change everything.
Well, speaking of the Earthsea books, Tahanu came out many years after the last book, after the third book in the Earthsea trilogy, and yet it picks right up from where it left off. Don, do you think it really fits in with the other 3 books at all?
It does and it doesn't. It's certainly written by the same writer. I mean, the gracefulness of the prose and the portrait of the land is very much the same, but it's more written from. We've had an ongoing discussion of Tahanu in the New York Review of Science Fiction recently, yes. And the general consensus seems to be that Le Guin took a lot of criticism from feminists over the patriarchal vision in the earlier trilogy, and she felt like she had to redress this when she wrote Tahanu, and as a result, there are many people who feel that they really don't go together quite as well.
Has Tahanu gone too far in the other direction, you think? I mean, going too far towards being feminist?
It's possible.
I think one of the things... What are we doing next week? Next week we are doing...
Japanese animation.
Yes, we're doing Japanese animation. We're having genuine Japanese animation people, people who actually know a great deal about the subject.
Or people who are just into it.
Right, like usual. And
who will teach us enormously.
Teach us greatly. You will learn, you will laugh, you will cry, you will have a wonderful time.
So we can learn and compare and talk about different kinds of animation too?
Yeah. Okay. We will see you then. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.
Every